What's up, everybody? Welcome to a epic Friday night here on Logical, Plausible, Probable. We've got something that's been long in the works. People have been waiting. I've been getting emails, comments, text messages. Hey, when is this going to happen? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Tonight, the long-awaited interview opportunity I had with Dr. James Tour is going to be premiering part one of over 6 hours of conversation between the two of us on a variety of topics ranging from his background, his current research, the going through comments, addressing the critics and the thank yous and his peers, all these different things that were brought up in relation to his Origin of Life lecture series that was really catalyzed by last year by Professor Dave Explains, also known as Dave Farina, who kind of came out and said Dr. Tour was making things up, not being honest, and not showcasing the real truth about where things stand in Origin of Life research, and kind of sparked Dr. Tour to take some time. Actually, he took about 6 months actually of looking at different things before and preparing to do his lecture series. And so this interview opportunity I had with him was kind of his postscript to that. And then, of course, in between the time I did the interview back on April 26th and now, 2 more videos from Dave came out. So that's kind of interesting. We'll be discussing those. But for everybody who is watching right now, this pre-show, I actually had the opportunity to have Dr. Cy Gart and Dr. James Carter, both who are PhD biochemists. And actually, Dr. Gart's actually currently doing research and helping on some projects in relation to Origin of Life research. And I know that he's had some interesting thoughts about all this. Dr. Carter has as well. And they actually, in the after show, I was able to put this together kind of, I didn't expect to have this kind of reaction, but actually Dr. Ryan Hayes is also going to be joining us in the after show. And these gentlemen are all going to do kind of a high-level expert little panel discussion about some of the different things in relation to all this topic in much more detail, and then we'll go into a open discussion after they've had the opportunity to kind of talk at a very high level and share a lot of their knowledge and understanding about where things stand and things that actually need to be talked about. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to do this on a Friday night. Really appreciate it. And James, how are you doing? What got you so interested in all this? And then Dr. Gart, I'd love to hear your side as well.
Well, as far as the YouTube stuff, I got interested probably last summer. I came across your channel, a couple of others, Standing for Truth, and was glad to see some fellow Christians out on YouTube willing to stick their necks out and take care of a lot of the unfairness that's being presented in a way that's really, I think, deliberately deceptive. And it was frustrating for me to see that. So I thought, well, I'm pretty secure in my job situation. I'm at a university that encourages critical thinking. And so I decided, hey, I've got a lot to say about this subject. There's still a lot I'm learning. So I spent, most of the summer just listening to as many podcasts and YouTube channels and things that I could while I was doing work around the house and reading papers, trying to get up to date on the stuff, and channels like yours has been great for that. You have on a lot of really qualified experts, so that has been a real blessing. But I've been interested in the whole creation evolution controversy probably since high school. My high school biology teacher presented both sides of the evidence for and against evolution, and I thought that was fascinating. You typically only hear one side of the story when you read books and papers and watch nature shows, and so I thought that was refreshing to be able to analyze it from both sides. And I think that's something I try to instill in my students. I've been teaching for about 10 years now, and there's often not a lot of time. You're just trying to get the facts out and hope that they can recall it. But to get them to think about things, to understand it to the point, they're going to forget a lot of the details, and it'll ring a bell and they can go back and look at it. But if they're not taught how to think about things and think about things critically, they're at a major disadvantage for whatever they do in their careers. So I'm glad we have this opportunity to have these open live discussions where you can hear both sides of the stories. Dr. Tour is not alone. We want him to know that there's thousands of other scientists that are skeptical, whether they're Christian or not, of some of these claims in abiogenesis, and how a lot of the problems are being swept under or ignored, or just I think the way that it's presented, especially once it makes it to the mainstream media and the popular scientific articles, is you get a very different picture than what's actually going on behind the scenes. So we're kind of here to pull behind the curtain and expose Oz, if you will.
No, that's great. And it's one of the points that Dr. Tour made in his series. He was talking about, I think it's really went over Dave Farina's head, because he made the explicit point that very often you better go and look at the supplemental components of the papers, because when you really go and look at them as a chemist and analyze what's being said, you run into a lot of things that wouldn't necessarily be obvious if you were just reading the prose, if you will, portion of the paper. And Dr. Gar, will you give us a little bit of your background? You have a very interesting story. You were an atheist, and now you're a Christian, but also you've been heavily involved in analyzing things in the origin of life, just an aspect of science. So I'd love to hear your opinion on that. And then if you what use your, after you finish talking about yourself, please let me know what you think about what I just said about the supplemental portion of the papers and that significance.
Yeah, I think a lot of people know my story, but I wrote a book about it, which I'll just hold up for a second here. That's the extent of my promotion. Yeah, I was raised in an atheist family, very militant atheist. And is there a feedback?
You're coming through fine for me.
Okay, sorry. Very militant atheist family, and remained an atheist for many decades. I went to school, I went to college, learned science, went to graduate school, became a biochemist. And almost from the beginning of my graduate studies, things that I was learning just didn't fit together. I mean, I had a typical materialistic reductionist attitude. Everything can be, bottom up, and you get life, pretty automatically. But that didn't fit with what I was learning about things like protein synthesis and the genetic code. I mean, there's something else going on. And I started asking a lot of questions. And I think James and Jim Tour and everybody, every scientist, and what James said was really great. I'd like to corroborate everything he said about a lot of scientists these days looking very deeply into what's called the standard model of evolution, and coming up with a lot of questions and a lot of alternative ideas. Now, it doesn't mean that they're all becoming creationists, but it does mean that everybody is recognized. And by everybody, I mean, as James said, not all Christians. Many of these are non-Christian scientists who are coming up with alternative, at least ideas, if maybe not solutions, but certainly questions about the standard model. So it's a very exciting time to be in biology and biochemistry, because there's a lot going on. And eventually I did become a Christian, and I like Jim Tour, Jim always says, I love Jesus Christ. It's the most important thing. And I feel the same way. But my scientific opinions are based on the science, not based on my Christian faith. That's very important, I think, to stress. And of course, what's interesting, and it's not something I expected when I first became a Christian, is that those two ways of thinking, those two worldviews, the scientific worldview and the Christian worldview, are actually very compatible, and they end up coming together. And that, of course, tells us a lot. I mean, we talk about the two books, the book of God's Word, the Bible. We talk about the book of God's works, which is nature, and we expect them to be telling the same truth. And, what I like to say is, if it looks like they're not, we're getting one or both of them wrong, and we have to keep working. So I think that's a general overview. People listen to you, John, have heard me talk before. I don't want to take up too much time. I do have a lot to say about, this whole, of many of the points that Dave, and we have to thank Ryan Hayes for saying, let's not call him Professor Dave, because he is not a professor. There's a very specific meaning to the word professor, as James well knows very well. And he is not one.
I think some people don't understand the ranking there. We're not trying to be elitist here. It's a matter of kind of title, like in the military, you have captains, generals, things like that. So typically in the American and British system, you have to start off as an instructor. You spend a few years teaching, get some years under your belt, then you get promoted. There's typically a series of ranks you climb, and then you become assistant professor. You get a few publications, then you become associate professor, which in most cases, most universities, you cannot attain an associate professor title until you have a PhD. So that would already disqualify Dave. And then full professor is when you finally get to be called professor.
That's right. Exactly. That's right.
So it's a long climb. I've been teaching for 10 years, and the highest I've ever attained is associate professor. A couple more publications, maybe I could become full professor, but it's not something you can get without a PhD and a lot of publications and a lot of teaching experience or research experience.
Yeah, it takes time. I can testify to that.
So would it be fair to say that in this comparison analogy perspective we're talking about right now, that we're talking about, first class airman versus general, obviously Dr. Tour being the general.
Right.
I got some good entertainment. I was something you'll find out in the, I think in part 2, the interview, I actually did a brief analysis of some of the more well-known origin of life researchers and did an H-index comparison. And not to give too much away, but just as putting context, Lee Cronin, who's considered, as you all know, is considered one of the more premier, or at least well-known origin of life researchers, his H-index is 81, which is impressive in and of itself. Dr. Tour is 161.
Should we explain what the H-index is?
Feel free to do so. And a little additional tidbit of trivia knowledge for you guys. You will both recognize and appreciate. He's been quoted 117,000 times, I believe it is, and of that, 45,000 of them have been within the last 5 years.
That's cited. You mean cited?
What did I say?
Quoted.
Yes, cited. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I meant cited. Yes.
So a citation is when another paper mentions one of your papers, and the H-index is the number of papers you have published that have been cited by the same number of other papers. So a citation, an H-index of 161 means that 161 of your publications have been cited at least 161 times.
Well, and something like
that's huge.
Can you guys confirm what I'm about to ask, which is, if I understand it correctly, the higher your H-index gets, the harder it is to increase it. Is it it's not just a equal move? You have to.
Every increase. So my H-index is 53, which means I have 53 publications that have been cited at least 53 times. To get to 54, another one of my papers has to be cited more. Okay, so if I get a 54th paper that finally gets 54 citations, then my H-index goes to 54. And that's why it takes a lot to get a higher number. But it's also a little bit cheating, because as you get older, more and more people are citing your papers. So it goes up with age. That's why mine is high, because I'm pretty old.
Well, yeah, like I said, it was kind of interesting to me as I was going through and looking at some of the the well-known names, and I was very watching their credibility in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But I was stunned at just how dramatically higher the Dr. Tour's H-index was than some of these other very famous individuals.
Oh, yeah, he's
and from a chemistry, especially a synthetic chemist perspective, he was ranked in the top 10 in the world. He's in the top 10 most cited chemist in the world. Was voted one of the top 50 influential minds on the planet. When you think, to me, I found the attacks against him to be blunt, rather ignorant. Not just from a scientific perspective, but from did you not Google his credentials, because not just as a chemist, not just as a pure academic, but as an inventor. I mean, all these different things that have been accomplished in Dr. Tour's career. I mean, it's like, you might disagree with his philosophy, but come on, man. Like, you're calling out kind of a major player here.
Well, I said this the other night when we were on that other after show, that what really disturbed me the most about Dave's videos are the brutal way he treated, this, as you say, incredibly well-respected, very senior, highly regarded, real scientist, academic. And that's just not done. I mean, that's a giveaway for what that tells us more about him than about the person he's attacking. And I found that really outrageous.
Now we're wrapping up here in just a couple minutes. But to kind of give the audience a little bit of a teaser, I know that obviously when we do the panel discussion after the interview, you guys have more things in depth you're going to discuss in specifics. What are the James? What would you say was your number one thing that just kind of stuck as a chemist? What really just stuck out to you in the videos you watched?
Well, before we even talk about the chemistry, one thing that stood out to me was kind of the irony of Dave spending so much time trying to say that because James Tour focuses mostly on synthetic chemistry and nanotechnology, that he has absolutely no qualifications to evaluate as a chemist origin of life chemistry. I mean, like, there's no overlap there at all, and then goes on to talk like he is an expert in the field of origin of life. I mean, yeah, he had to resort to pulling in 3 or so people who are actually doing research in it, but the majority of his talk, he spoke as an authority in the field. If he can read these papers and comprehend them, certainly Dr. Tour is just as capable of analyzing, criticizing these papers as a highly intelligent synthetic chemist. As far as the other thing I noticed is there was just a lot of misleading, to the point where I really think it had to be deliberate. A lot of use of fuzzy words, and then trying to nail Dr. Tour on it, like saying he doesn't understand. He's saying that there isn't selection, and of course, in reference here, Dr. Tour is talking about biological selection or biotic selection, and Dave conflates that with chemical or physical selection, which is an entirely different thing. In fact, chemical and physical selection can actually turn you away from life. It can lead you further away towards the chemistry that you need for life, because you select things based on concentrations and not whether they're useful or not, and whether they have the same polarity or not. And so we can talk about more of the details in the after show, but I just wanted to point out that one of the key takeaways is how much is left out of the presentation is just as important as what he included, and what he included was often full of problems. I watched both the videos as soon as they came out, and just shaking my head the whole time. I'm like, there are so many problems here. I need to start cataloging them. So today I went back and started making an Excel spreadsheet, and let's see, just in the first 6 minutes of the first 60-minute video. So in 10% of the video, I counted 24 things like insults, mind reading, misattribution, double standard, several logical fallacies. He begs the question. I was like, wow, that's just the first 6 minutes, and I come up with that list. Imagine, both videos, and that's just the stuff he included. And we still have to discuss the things that he didn't address. Obviously, in a 14-part series that's heavily based on science and covers a lot of papers, there's many things that were not addressed. The difficult problems, and I'd like to see some of the origin of life researchers be honest enough to say, some of these points you brought up are really good points, or these are things that we're still struggling with, or these are things that we may never have the answer to, and these are things that physically and chemically, everything we know about it cannot happen. I hope they'd be honest enough to portray both sides of the story, but I understand why Dave would want to just show a few clips of what they had to say, which were mostly not that relevant to the actual the chemistry, or left out important parts.
Interesting. And okay, so we're about to wrap up. So everybody gets ready to start heading on over to the main interview stream. Dr. Gard, to wrap up, what anything that stuck out to you that you want to cover when we get into the after show?
I echo James again. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. We scratched a little of the surface a few days ago when we had that other after show, but there's just a tremendous amount. I've had some discussions since that after show with a number of other scientists, some of whom have seen it, and I think, I mean, there's just so much to talk about that I think we're gonna have to find a way to organize it. I like James' approach of making an Excel file, and I didn't think of doing that, but that's what it would take.
And something I hope we discuss in the after show too is I believe Dr. Tor is going to be able to listen in for a few moments to the after show. I would really love if we were able to kind of relay to him of like, hey, Dr. Tor, you're not alone in this.
Right.
Because
that's true.
Because he is, as we're talking about his credibility, I mean, he's way up the food chain, right?
Right.
He is the man, the guys in their leadership positions often, as the saying goes, they stand alone. And, they need the support behind them because there's only so far they can go by themselves. And I think that, as we all know, there are plenty of people that are, those of us who are a little bit more in the trenches, know that there actually is support. But we need that person of the high level credibility and and credentials, if we will. I'm not bashing you guys. I'm just talking from a global perspective with Dr. Tor, right?
Right.
Hang on, somebody of his standing is saying this too, and then everybody else will be like, yes, we are. Let's have the real come to truth moment. And as Dr. Tor called for at the end of the series, he said, hey, I'm not saying we stop all research. I'm saying that we have a moratorium on where we stand. And I think that's a very, very important thing that we all need to consider. All right, folks, we got to wrap up because I got to head on over to the next stream, get things rocking and rolling. Gentlemen, appreciate you so much. Folks, link is in the description. It's pinned in the side chat. Make sure you head on over to the live interview. I've got a special guest coming in at the very beginning of all this. You are not going to want to miss. I've got some fun stuff that's going to be happening before we kick into the actual interview. So make sure you head on over there. And gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the pre-show. Look forward to talking with you more later on after the interview.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.